Where do I start? Where do I begin? How do I start?
So hi there, Unlimiteds. In this week's Conversation Unlimited, I'd love to introduce Elva Ainsworth from Talent Innovations. Hi there, Elva.
Hi there. Hi.
Hi, welcome. And, one of the things as a coach, and as coaches, we're always looking for different ways to create insight in the conversation with a client. And I believe that one of the key tenets of Talent Innovations is insight is everything. I think if you go to your website, that's bang center, front and center on the first page is insight and everything. So without further ado, what I'd love to talk about is how do you create insight?
Wow, what a great question. And I'm so pleased you got insight from my new website. It's always useful to get the feedback on the messages. And I guess that's what this Talent Innovations is all about. Is about enabling the feedback loop to happen and to happen powerfully for people, and to have insights occur and emerge, but in an empowering way. So the Talent Innovations I started 15 years ago, and I started Talent Innovations with an absolute desire to build a 360-degree feedback tool that really, really did a good job of insight in an empowering way, leaving people really getting the leaving a feedback on a higher plane, in a higher gear than they went into it. And that's what Talent Innovations does. That's what we focus on.
And I mean, for me, I haven't been through your process, but I resonate with the idea of a 360-degree feedback process, because I've worked in corporate life, and in fact, literally as I was leaving my last proper job, as I call it, I was going through that process, and it was quite an extensive process. For those listening, because a number of Unlimiteds have been through that, and some haven't. Many have simply been entrepreneurs, and they may not have experienced that. So what is a 360-degree feedback process? Well, how does that work?
Yeah. How it works is, it's the sort of generic name for a process where you ask for feedback from all around you in the organisation that you're in. So it's normally when you're in a corporate situation, we're used to getting feedback from our bosses, but it goes beyond that. So you have your boss give you feedback. You might rate yourself on something, and then you may have 3 or 4 or 5 colleagues. You may have 3 or 4 or 5 people who report to you, or maybe your whole team if you've got a team of 6, for instance. And you may have some external stakeholders or some clients or some other senior people who are important to you. And I mean, I always ask the question, whose feedback are you genuinely interested in? And it's gathering the feedback from those people and then seeing how they differ. Even family, actually. We do a version of 360. I think our client calls it 540, but it adds the family dimension to it, and that can really show up some interesting stuff where you see the sort of organizational persona compared with the home version. It's seeing the perspective from the different roles and positions, in seeing that in detail, in color, if you like, in technicolor. It allows you to really get clear how you're going down in your job, how you're impacting other people. How are you influencing them? Are you inspiring them? Are you irritating them? Are you seen to be doing your job or not? And what sort of job do they think you should be doing anyway? You see so much through looking through other people's eyes at you as an individual. It's extraordinary.
And when you get those insights, well, actually, a couple of things come to my mind. And I know that when I went into this process, I went in with a mix of feelings because as I say, it wasn't your process, so I wouldn't comment on your exact process, but I went into a 360 process. And I knew that one of my peers really didn't like me. And to me, it was fascinating because, first of all, I was probably a little bit nervous that they could have really gone to town with some pretty heavy negative feedback. But equally, I was intrigued as to how they would handle it. So how does that come up? Because, if I'm giving feedback on my peers, or, the classic situation, which is I hate my boss, and if I'm giving feedback on my boss, how do people actually show up in that? Because in this situation, I guess everybody's being a coach. Everybody's providing insights about who the person who the subject is. So how does that show? What's your experience of that?
Yes, and I've seen many, literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of 360 reports and given feedback to many senior level people right down. And there's a number of things that happen. You're right to say everyone is being a coach in that situation, because everyone can give constructive, useful feedback or not. And what you see sometimes is that people, if they're afraid of speaking up, they can show up in the data as not giving anything at all. They might give straight 5 out of 5 on everything and literally say nothing else. And just that doesn't mean they think they're brilliant. It might mean that, but it might mean that, I just don't want to say. I'm not wanting to say in this moment in time. So basically, you're setting up a sort of automated process. You're inviting people to participate, and then they choose to engage with it or not, depending on where they're up to. And how that invitation is given makes a big difference. The general context of what's going on, are people supported? Who's seeing that data? Who owns that data? Is someone going to be fired as a result of this data? These are all really, really important things. Or is it just this person's getting coaching themselves and they genuinely want to explore their impact on other people around them? Then, you're likely to get a different way of engaging. But the data can tell you often more about the reviewers than the individual themselves. It can give a lot away about how they feel and what they're trying to do. Sometimes there can be all sorts of political issues going on. If it's very political, sometimes 360 is not the right thing to be doing, for instance. So it's not a process to go into without proper consideration, I would say, proper planning and support.
And as I say, when you say insight is everything, and I think, when I sit with a client, I will engage in conversation for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. Typically when I first meet with a client, I will speak to them for 2 hours. I'll speak with them for 2 hours. And hopefully they're doing most of the talking. And I'm listening and creating views and perspectives, and I'm curious. I'm always curious about where they're going and what their motivations are, and how they're connected to the outside world. What I'm curious about with this process is it's almost the reverse of that, which is the subject, the client, if you like, is receiving a lot of input from the outside.
Yeah.
So, from your perspective, how is that then converted into a coaching conversation? And to me, what I mean by coaching in this case is where you take an idea that the client wants to work on and then transform to something else. So that's, at a very simplistic level, that's what I mean by coaching. So how do you take this 360 view of the world, which is lots of people have told me about me, I might have participated myself as well, how does that then become a coaching engagement or a coaching conversation?
Really good question. And I would say there's no guarantee that it turns into any sort of coaching conversation, actually, because having great insight and great data, it doesn't mean the person receiving that feedback is going to be genuinely interested, genuinely open or ready, or just feels they can actually look at the harsh reality of what people think. There's lots that need to be in place for the individual to get the learning from the situation, from the data. So what I see is that there's various things that need to be put in place for the individual to be coachable on their data. That's how I term it. And and I've over the last 15 years, I've developed a way where I can almost guarantee that I'm sitting with someone with their data and they're going to be coachable. And it's taken a lot of years to work that out because in the main, people start the conversation, especially as I'm normally invited in from outside. The individual themselves isn't asking me, and it's the HR person organising the 360 project. So it's not led by the coachee, it's led by the HR on the line. They're faced with me, faced with their data. They never asked for this. Like, all their barriers are up. All their fear and anxiety is there to some extent, and there's a lot of protecting themselves and their ego. There's a lot of that. It can be very emotional, and it can show up in all sorts of ways. So there's a number of techniques that I use and I train other people in how to make sure they're okay. And it's all about managing the emotions, actually, and managing that fear, and giving them privacy and security. So, and then when they're there, I will work really hard to get clear with them what they want in their career or their job, as I'm sure you do in your coaching session. You know, you're working to their agenda, to what they want. I spend a lot of time clarifying that, and I actually don't look at the data until I've got that agreed and on the table between us. And only then do I coach, and I coach inside of what they want.
Yeah.
And that makes all the difference.
You know, what's coming to my mind here, and I'm thinking about people in Coaching Unlimited who want to work in the corporate environment, and they might not have done that yet, or they may have worked in but never coached in. You know, to me, there's a fundamental challenge comes up in that coaching, which is, you've named it here really, because the client is often the boss, or the line, or the HR director, or the HR business partner, whoever it is, and the individual is not necessarily consenting to this process. It's coming from outside, and the tension that you work within is, I have someone paying me over here, and I have someone sitting in front of me who, as you say, may be feeling emotional, they may be feeling challenged. How do you talk about creating that space? How do you create that safe container? I'm sure that the listeners will be very interested as to how you do that. What's the process by which you do that?
Yeah, it is a good question. It's so important. And actually what I found recently, I've been doing more work with the more senior leaders, because I've been joyful actually in discovering that directors in the last couple of years have been genuinely inquiring and curious about their 360s, when 10 years ago they weren't interested at all. So for me, this is brilliant. But for them, these issues are perhaps even more extreme because they're so visible. So there's various things that I have found make a difference. One is getting a clear agreement and clarity about the purpose of whatever process that you're going through. And what I do, actually, I pin down what's the primary purpose as against the secondary or tertiary. And I allow people to be doing other things, because you're never coaching just for one reason. Do you know, there's always a few things you're trying to do here, especially if you're engaged with the various stakeholders in setting up the process. But to have everyone agree the primary purpose, and then make sure that the whole process is designed in line with that purpose. And I take a very strong line now. If the primary purpose is development, is truly growth and development for that individual, then I say, okay, in that case, they're going to own the data, they're going to choose their reviewers, they're going to choose their coach, they're going to engage with the coaching conversation or not. They're going to have the choices, and I take a very strong line on who has the control, and it's the individual. And often I meet resistance with that with the HR people, because they feel they're having, it's theirs, they're paying for it, it's their process. And I go, no, if you want development, have to give them control. So I look for every single opportunity to give control to the individual who's getting the feedback, even to the point of controlling the content of the 360. So our system allows them to, for instance, add their own personal questions, so that literally the 360 survey itself is personalised to them, and they'll recognise that it is stuff they are genuinely interested in. So I find every time you give them control, they relax and let it in, if you like, and become more comfortable. Then it's about being very clear about the permissions, about who's saying what to whom, and who's seeing the data, who's seeing copies of the data, who's seeing perhaps aggregate data. So with 360, one of the things you can do is you can say the conversation of this feedback meeting, might be a 2-hour meeting, me and you, it's all private. The data, your data will be aggregated with others in your level, and we will be talking about general themes and observations, but your personal perspective will be private. So immediately they can relax, and it becomes their agenda. And then it's about being really clear what my personal commitment is to them in the session, and depending on how it's been set up, I will often explicitly say early on, my commitment to you is that you leave this 2-hour meeting absolutely clear that you understand each page of data and really clear where you're going to focus on moving forward. You may not have all the answers to the questions. You may have, in fact, we may generate more questions than you've come in with, but you will be clear that you've understood each of the pages of data, and you'll feel comfortable about that. You'll know what you're doing with it. And so it's about being really clear on your commitment to them, and that you're going to deliver on that. And they really relax, they open up, and then after that point, it's a process of really serious, deep, what I call deep listening. It's like listening with every cell of my body, because it's not what they say, of course, it's what they don't say, it's what you feel when they are talking about something, or they turn a page of data, and I might feel a bit of anxiety or something, and so it's like, okay, what's that about? And so then it's about very careful questioning around the data, so that they really share actually themselves as deeply as they're happy with, I would say. I've had to learn how to manage my boundaries very painfully. I was qualified as a homeopath at the same time as being in business psychology, and for me it was very easy to have people go very, very deep and into the stuff that was deeply relevant to them, but beyond the normal coaching conversation. So I've really had to learn how to manage those boundaries. That's not always such a good idea. So I tread very carefully and leave them to drive the pace and the depth. Actually, that's the main thing.
And actually, just on that point on boundaries, and I'm intrigued because I don't work through corporates. I do have clients who might be corporate executives, but they've engaged me privately, and so, or they've engaged me personally, and then they get their company to pay.
Right.
But what's interesting to me is I'll coach them on whatever they want to bring. So I'm curious, when you talk about those boundaries, I have a sense of what that might be. How do you establish agreement before you start about where you will take that conversation, or do you reflect on the moment and say, this is an area where I'm not comfortable going? How do you establish that boundary?
So I say to them what's been agreed in terms of data and feedback. So that's really important up front. And then if it looks like it's going into rather less obvious places, but let me put it that way, then I might say, do you know what? We're perhaps a bit off specs here. I just want to acknowledge that, and so I sort of bring it to their attention and give them a choice. What I do say to them is also worth mentioning, is to say to them, look, if there's there may be some things that come up here which I think it would be a good idea for me to refer back and debrief on. But I will tell you what those things are, and we'll agree what I say and to whom. And so that allows me sort of permission to raise points, if you like. So if there's something like, sometimes bullying comes up in 360 and it becomes obvious that there's some sort of form of bullying. This happened to me the other day in a large organisation. I was giving a feedback, and this person had had such a painful year and a half in this job. I don't know how she was carrying on in this job. The data was just desperately bad, and her confidence was on the floor. And on questioning, I could see that the way the boss was with this individual was really seriously dysfunctional, and this person was really struggling with this boss. So, my main questioning was, what actions do you want to take about this? What do you think really is going on, et cetera, et cetera. In the end, I said, I really think you need to raise the issues with this particular boss, with the HR department. How do you feel about that? And she said, I don't want to do it. I'm not going to do it. So I asked her, would you be happy if I did it on your behalf, with your permission? And she said, yeah, I'd be happy for you to do that. And I agreed with her what I went back to them with, and because I was in HR myself, I sort of know where the HR people are coming from, if you like, and I find that I can be very useful in debriefing to HR and to the line manager, and very often, sometimes doing a feedback with all those people in the room. Actually, at the same time, I did one just last week, where there was the line manager, the individual, and the HR person all on the phone with the 360 feedback, and I had an hour to cover it. Now, you might think that flipping heck, that's quite a tall order. How on earth are you going to make any difference? What I was thinking was, how on earth am I going to make a difference to this person in an hour? This is completely unreasonable and unbelievable. And that was certainly my initial thoughts. But actually, it was extremely useful. I could bring in everybody's different angle on the agenda, got clear what we were really doing, and got agreement from everyone that what there was to do for that individual was to get clear on her future ambition. She wasn't clear on ambition, and no one could really guide her as to next steps until she was clear on that point, and everybody left with that clarity. So in terms of passing information to and fro, I think it can be so useful for the organisation. The 360 can throw up what's really going on. I see it as telling the truth faster than it's naturally being told. That's how I see it. People are encouraged to say more than they normally say, a little bit more, sometimes a lot more, and then you have to handle it. But it's always the perspective of the individual, unless they're deliberately, saying something they don't believe, which doesn't really normally happen. One assumes they're telling the truth from their perspective, and it's showing up the truth. And sometimes that can be fiery, it can be tricky, but it is at least showing, it's acting as a catalyst for things moving forward.
Yeah.
So, I've been doing coaching for many, many, many years, and I wouldn't coach without a 360 as being part of the data that's sort of accessible by me and my coachee. It just seems a sort of obvious bit of information I need to work with, because simply people don't know what's in their blind spot, because that's the nature of blind spots. They don't know what's there until they look.
What I love about what you're saying is, it brings up, in fact, you just added a third there, but you bring up two critical points that I always come back to, which is, the first one is agreements. Agreements are so powerful, and they create such a powerful reference point for coaching. And, so many coaching conversations don't have agreements in them. They have expectations. And expectations are fluid and plastic, and they don't work. Whereas agreements, they provide key reference points that you can come back to. And permission, as you say yourself, it creates that sense of safety and where the coachee is really committing to be part of the process.
Yeah.
And the third one you bring up is blind spots. Of course, that's what we do as coaches. We help people find blind spots. And I'm really intrigued to dive in a little bit on your journey with coaching. I think you were saying that you made your first coaching proposal in the corporate world in 1999, and I'm really curious to hear how has your journey as a coach evolved in that time, and also I think to pick up your point, which is now you feel almost under-resourced if you go into a coaching conversation without the 360-degree feedback. So I'm curious as to what that journey has been for you and how that has evolved, where you're now using this tool in a powerful way.
Yes. Yes, it was funny to remember that was that first contract proposal I did and delivered. It was with a big IT company, and what I remember was that we were using all sorts of psychometrics at the time, a personality questionnaire and something else, and we were integrating that. And what we were saying was, we're not just going to give you the feedback on the results. We're then going to have a conversation that will turn that feedback into something really useful. And that's what we call the coaching. And we were defining it fresh. No one else had any better idea. But it was revolutionary, really. And they loved it. They bought it. And it made a huge difference to those people. And what was interesting was it created an expectation in those individuals that they would not just get their data, they would get something else out of it. And they weren't sure what it was. So I guess then came the whole, how do you work out what they're going to get, and how do you make sure they're not disappointed, etc. And I think I learned the real hard way actually about managing expectations. People were disappointed, and all sorts happened in the early years. I tended to be always working off data because that was my sort of core expertise. So that's how my coaching skill developed, if you like. And as I say, my homeopathic training as well brought a whole different angle to it. As a homeopath, really, what I learned in my 6 years of training as a homeopath was that I might be asking you about your symptoms in detail, but in the process of doing that, I will be giving you magical, invisible coaching that will turn your life around if you allow me to. And if you allow the messages in, if you allow the thinking to happen. And so I got really clear that it was about safety and people giving you permission, and it's about the listening and the perspective. And my skill and was very much connected to me being present and just being like it not being about me at all. I left me at the door. I came in, and I was there for them. As I say, every single cell in my body had to be there, listening to them. And I guess in terms of where did coaching go after that, I got tougher, actually, a lot tougher with myself in terms of permissions. I would turn away from conversations very clearly if I thought they weren't quite ready for them, because I felt that it was dangerous. So I learned to sort of come back to be sure it was safe for them, and to really listen to meet them. Actually, that's the key lesson I learned over those years, was to pick up where they were at and match where they were at and give them whatever matched that position, not where I thought they should go, but not what they said they wanted either. What they said they wanted might be very different from where they're actually at. So what I learned was to be acutely aware of how coachable they were. And then where my journey went to was I got some coaching myself on teams, Tetra Teams it was called, from an American coach, and he coached me in how I was operating in teams. and I started to see the dynamic of people a whole other level, and I started to realise that coaching individuals was very limiting, and I found that the results were only at a certain level. So what I started to see was that the individual as a dynamic in an organisation, and obviously always being in a corporate setting, this made sense. And basically I'd only coach people in terms of their relationships with other people now, either through their 360 or with the other people around them, and to coach relationships rather than individuals. And that's a whole other level of result that's possible out of that. It's very challenging as well, because you've got an extra complexity of dynamics going on. But coaching a relationship is also safer, because it's, in a way, it's not you as an individual, it's this thing over there that sits between you and someone else, and it can be detached from you. So that's where I've got to.
And I think that latter point is a very important one, in the corporate environment, because in true corporate environment, people clearly don't exist in isolation. They exist as part of a team, or either as a leader or a member. And corporates work because people work together in some way. So yeah, I see the importance of that. So I think there's one last question I'd like to ask you, and one thing I've noticed with coaches, one of the few things that excites a coach more than learning more about coaching is learning about how they find clients. Coaches like to do work and work professionally. The professional coaches want to find more clients. So I'm curious for you, how do you create a client? What's your process for getting clients?
Oh, very good question. Yes. So I did the traditional thing of being an independent and, working off referrals and doing great work, and then, picking up every lead that came my way. And I found that only got me to a certain level and didn't allow me to grow. I was having a fairly full diary. I was doing some interesting work, but it wasn't really going any further than that. And so I changed the model that I was working with in 2004, and basically I've built a business from that point. And now the business is running at £1 million revenue and about 25% profit. So it's like a whole other level of business. So how I generate interesting coaching consulting work is by finding a market that's there, a product that people are wanting. In my case, I'm looking for a product that people are wanting. I found that coaching consulting work is all about the relationships, the individuals, and so that limits you to who you know. Broader than that, I thought you needed to go to a product. So that's the way I went. I'm sure there's other ways, but that's the way I went. And we actively market the product with a range of things. And we use free webinars, and I've written a book now on 360 that's due to be published. All these things make a huge difference. We actively work the website and really invest significant time and energy generating interest in the product. Now, when someone wants the product, we then go and talk to them and we see what we can do for and with them. And that's where the interesting coaching and consulting work gets created in conversation with those clients. So, we've increased our client base from sort of 20 probably in the initial years up to 200 now that we're literally delivering to all the time.
And how many, here's put you on the spot then, how of those 200, how many have come through pull, as in they've called you and want the product, and how many have come from a referral? A proportion, not exact numbers, but proportion.
Sure. Yeah, no, proportion. No, we measure it very carefully. So actually, this is the key tip, I suppose, of the day is measure these things all the time. Keep an eye on what activity you're doing, what result you're getting. Absolutely. So about a third of our business comes from referral still. And third of those clients have come directly from referrals from other people. So doing good work is a critical thing, because otherwise those referrals won't come in. And the rest is through sort of active marketing.
It's funny you should say that about measuring, because I recently did a call for Unlimited and about where my coaching revenue had come from. And when I did the analysis, I realized that between 70 and 80% of my revenue came from a market I didn't actively serve, which might sound completely crazy. But the area where I was putting all my effort was only responsible for 20 to 25% of my revenue. Even though it was revenue that was very enjoyable and work I really enjoyed doing, it wasn't actually my primary source of income. And which made me really think about actually how am I facing out into the world? Because if I can get that level of income accidentally, what could I do if it?
Quite right.
Absolutely is a key part of that journey. I get that. So I guess to close off, it's been time's gone by very quickly. Is there you've said a great tip there, powerful tip. Is there one thing? What one thing would you say to a coach who was really keen to start working in the corporate arena and wanted to make that breakthrough? What's the one thing you'd say to them?
I would say get really clear what you could do fantastically well in that marketplace. Not just do fantastically well, but also have the credibility, sound like you would do really well. What would that one little bit of that market be? Because it's a busy market, but so you'll need to differentiate yourselves very carefully in that market. But if there's any room, if it's a realistic prospect, there will be something there that you'll do fantastically well. Get that really clear, and then go find someone to play with and try out, do a good deal with them. Just get going and prove it to yourself, and then if you've proved it to yourself, you'll prove it to them, to others.
That is fantastic, Elva. Thank you so much for your insight. And
thank you.
If people would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way they can contact you?
Probably through the Talent Innovations website, actually. There's a contact form there. Just put your name down and say, please call Elva.
Fantastic. I'll get people to do that. Then what I'll do is when I send the recording out, I'll add the link into that so they can see that link. And I really appreciate your time and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
I hope you have a fantastic day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye for now.
Where do I start? Where do I begin? How do I